Emergency dispatcher Emily Colstock answered the 911 call at 9:43 a.m. on Thursday, April 21st, 2016. Her state-of-the-art instruments instantly began attempting to geolock the shaky-voiced caller's approximate location before she could finish the standard "Where is your emergency?" greeting, and Emily swiftly went to work pinpointing and confirming the initial triangulation. A familiar shot of adrenaline focused her brain. It accompanied the first few seconds of just about every call. Emily knew to expect the unexpected. She likewise knew her every word and action was being recorded, subject to future scrutiny by lawyers, jurors, journalists, and the general public. Emily trained and mentally prepared for big moments. Several stood out during the course of her distinguished career. This one, however, would set itself apart. A decorated dispatcher owning numerous professional awards and performance accommodations, the 45-year-old mom to twin kids lives a short drive from where cinematographers filmed the most famous scenes from Purple Rain. Emily was well aware deputies responded to dozens of incidences at the sprawling compound known as Paisley Park. Located squarely inside her coverage area over the last few years, the gated sanctuary's owner knew some of Emily's colleagues by first name, but most dispatches to Paisley Park resulted in little more than fodder for water cooler chatter and office scuttlebutt. The urgent requests for assistance being made this rainy morning, however, involved no fire alarms, delusional trespassers, or suspicious vehicles. No. Emily instantly recognized this as a red alarm emergency. The connection cracked solidly, and the voice calling from an unusual area code spoke clear but panicked into her headset. On the other end of the line was Andrew Cornfield, an aspirated and confused 28-year-old man from California whose red-eye flight landed in Minneapolis just a few hours earlier, sent to Minnesota by his father, Howard. Andrew provided detectives with key information during the earliest stages of what evolved into a lengthy and complex investigation. "We need an ambulance right now," Andrew shrieked into Emily's noise-canceling right headphone. "We have someone who is unconscious." Asked by Emily for his location, or better yet, an exact address, Andrew instantly replied, "At Prince's house," but he soon unintentionally revised his answer to Minneapolis. Paisley Park sits inside a wealthy Minneapolis suburb called Chanhassen, located 20 miles due west of the downtown clubs where Prince practiced songs like "For You" in 1999 live for the first times. The geographical error caused momentary confusion, but a nimble-minded Emily quickly confirmed Andrew's exact location. "The person is dead," Andrew rasped at first, careful not to mention an identity of the individual he believed deceased. "The people here are distraught." "I understand they are distraught," Emily calmly replied, as she again urged Andrew to look for a piece of mail or something with an address. "Do we know how the person died?" "I don't know," Andrew replied. "I don't know." His voice trailed off momentarily. Emily heard an unidentified female in the background recite the digit 7801, which Andrew mimed into his cell phone's mouthpiece like the dial on a bank vault. Those four numbers unlocked what Emily and her instruments suspected Andrew Cornfield was calling from 7801 Audubon Road inside Paisley Park, and something was very, very wrong. "You're at Paisley Park," Emily half-asked, half-stated. "Okay, that's in Chanhassen. Are you with the person who's—" Andrew answered before Emily finished her question. "Yes," he said, "it's Prince." A brief silence fell over the line. Those last two words escalated what might have garnered 4 inches on page 6 of Minneapolis Star-Tribune into a front-page story for newspapers around the globe. Okay, stay on the line with me," Emily said. A phone rang and buzzed from somewhere on Andrew's end. Logs obtained later via search warrant identified the likely caller as Fredra Ellis Lampkins, a California woman believed to be Prince's acting manager. Less than 3 minutes since receiving the initial distress call and now equipped with a specific response point, Emily issued an urgent request for medical assistance to all available units in the area. First responders from multiple agencies almost instantly declared themselves en route. Paramedics attached to nearby Ridgeview Medical Center, where Prince sought care on several previous occasions, received information describing a person down at Paisley Park and not breathing. A pair of sheriff deputies, each approximately 3 minutes from the scene, activated their lights and sirens. The Chanhassen Fire Department radioed their intent to respond as well. The voice shakes, unable to complete a verbalized thought. "We're going to get everybody," Emily assured. Chanhassen Fire Chief Don Johnson found himself just a few miles from Paisley Park and smack dab in the middle of a typically quiet Thursday morning tour when his radio cracked to life. Standardized information fields populated a dash-mounted computer, and Chief Johnson appeared to be the closest unit. A brief description simply indicated party down and not breathing. The chief, accompanied that morning by Fire Marshal Mark Litfin, immediately flipped on his emergency lights, charted a course for Paisley Park, and stepped onto the gas with a heavy foot. The 48-year-old chief had nearly 3 decades of public service under his belt, most of that time with the neighboring Hennepin County Sheriff's Office. Chief Johnson participated in the rescue and recovery efforts at the collapsed I-35 West Bridge site in Minneapolis and received an honorable discharge from the U.S. Marine Corps. He was no stranger to pressure situations or taking command of chaotic and emotional scenes. Chief Johnson became the city of Chanhassen's first-time fire chief in May of 2014 and felt familiar with Paisley Park's general layout. His department, consisting of about 50 firefighters, responded to multiple smoke, fire, and medical alarms at the property over the years. Chief Johnson now estimated his streaking SUV to be just 30 seconds from the main entrance and moving fast. Radio traffic indicated 2 separate Carver County deputies trailed closely behind him. The chief's dashboard clock read 9:47 a.m. The normally locked gates protecting Paisley Park's driveway were already swung open when Chief Johnson turned sharply off Audubon Road and into the complex, expansive parking lot. He reached the mansion's main entrance first, waved down by Andrew at the front door, cell phone still in his hand and wearing a black button-up shirt. Chief Johnson quickly traversed an expansive lobby with gold records lining vaulted walls and ornate furniture, sitting atop plush purple carpet. "I didn't start CPR because I thought he was dead," Andrew told Chief Johnson, a notably large American male in his 50s, and a petite female with light brown complexion, likely in her early 20s and wearing a white hoodie, stood just inside the double wide glass doors. Both were crying. "I think he might be dead," the big man sobbed. Andrew and the two other guided Chief Johnson down a short hallway to the right of the hatch he just entered to a small elevator landing. The car's doors were closed and the black male hit a square call button with a green down arrow. The doors split open immediately, and Chief Johnson saw a man he instantly recognized as Prince laying unresponsive on the floor. He entered the elevator and made contact with Prince's flesh. It felt warm. Chief Johnson reported he found Prince laying on his back, face up against the back of the elevator, with his arms down to his sides. Prince's skin color appeared normal at first glance. What he believed to be saliva drained out of the mouth, and Chief Johnson deliberately noted the absence of foam cone or obvious vomit, both possible indications of an overdose. Needing more room to maneuver, Chief Johnson made the decision to move Prince's body. "I normally would not have moved the body if I thought he was deceased. And the only reason I moved him was because he felt warm," Chief Johnson later explained. Deputy Adam Hastings arrived just as Chief Johnson easily and smoothly lifted Prince's petite frame from underneath the arms and removed him head first from the elevator car. Deputy Hastings reached the landing and watched as Chief Johnson checked for a pulse. The chief found none, but he loudly announced commencement of CPR efforts. Prince now rested on his back. Deputy Hastings, who witnessed the final seconds of the body being moved out of the elevator, later wrote he observed Prince's arm being stiff and that it remained in the same position as he was moved on the floor. Deputy Hastings further reported no visual response to external stimulation. Each of the first 6 people to see Prince's body later reported observing advanced signs of rigor mortis. A second young deputy arrived on the scene and brought with him an automated external defibrillator, AED. Deputy James Horvath passed the device to Deputy Hastings as Chief Johnson began chest compressions. Paramedics entered the building with a clatter and hurried toward the room of 3 men. Deputy Hastings prepared the AED's nodes and flipped its power switch to the on position. Paramedics reached the body and ordered everyone to take a step back. One cut Prince's shirt and took over performing CPR while the other placed white monitor pads designed to detect a heartbeat on Prince's calves and right wrist. A slight purplish tint to the left side of Prince's face suggested the presence of early lividity. Obvious signs of widespread rigor, coupled with an asystole or flatline reading on their portable heart monitor, were enough for both EMTs to quickly agree life-saving measures could be ceased. Chest compressions halted and Deputy Hastings powered off the AED unit. One of the paramedics called a nearby hospital and soon received permission to declare time of death. It was officially recorded as 10:07 a.m. Rain fell audibly outside. Sergeant Jason Briunig, perhaps the Carver County Sheriff's Office most seasoned patrol veteran, hustled through Paisley Park's main entrance at approximately 9:50 a.m. and noted 3 grieving civilians just inside the front door. He snapped on a pair of latex gloves and joined the two paramedics, Chief Johnson and Deputies Hastings and Horvath, near the elevator. A community service officer by the name of Sanchez had also arrived on the scene, and the fire marshal who rode with Chief Johnson that morning stood off to one side. Learning paramedics just halted life-saving measures, the EMT in charge explained to Sergeant Briunig his belief Prince had not died recently. Representing the ranking law enforcement member currently on site, Sergeant Briunig assumed command of what would, until further notice, be treated as a potential crime scene. His first objective: obtain statements from each of 3 adults inside Prince's mansion. When emergency responders arrived, Deputy Hastings readied his voice recorder, notebook, and cell phone for interviews. As he did, Chief Johnson informed the others he wanted to check the property for CO2 levels, specifically the underground parking garage located beneath their feet. Sergeant Briunig sent Deputy Horvath with the chief for security purposes, recalling a frequent contact from his cell phone's address book. Sergeant Briunig thumbed a blue telephone icon and heard the line buzz twice before his supervisor, Lieutenant Eric Kittleson, picked up and identified himself with a familiar greeting. The 2 men knew each other well and worked closely on a day-to-day basis. This conversation would be much shorter than most. The message clear: I'm at Paisley Park standing next to Prince's dead body, and we need everyone available to respond as soon as possible. Lieutenant Kittleson estimated his time of arrival to be 15 minutes or less. The 2 men disconnected, and Sergeant Briunig next placed a similar call to veteran detective DeWitt Meyer, who during an even shorter conversation informed Sergeant Briunig he would be responding immediately with a team of detectives. The brass would be notified. No longer needed. With the time of death now declared, the pair of paramedics requested and received permission to clear the scene. They touched base briefly with the 3 civilian adults in the lobby as they left. The young female, just beginning to speak one-on-one with Deputy Hastings again, buckled in grief at mention of Prince's body and writhed in a renewed bout of sobbing. The EMTs took nothing with them, and Sergeant Briunig noted their time of departure as 10:10 a.m. Nobody touched the body again for several hours. Prince died wearing a black Rasta-style beanie hat that now slid halfway up the sides of his head. Jet black hair peeked out from all sides, and it came nowhere near the length of some historical styles. Some might say it leaned towards short. A black Under Armour pullover, size small, covered his torso, and a pair of black nylon lounge pants reached mid-calf. Both garments soon provided puzzling clues. Sergeant Briunig recognized the white medical patches on the exposed skin of Prince's calf muscles and wrists. In his experience, paramedics apply them as a matter of standard operating procedure when encountering unresponsive patients in the field. Simple black socks, no shoes, and a blue band on his right wrist rounded out the visible pieces of Prince's final outfit. Chief Johnson and Deputy Horvath returned after just a few minutes and reported no unusual levels of CO2 or anything else obviously out of place. Chief Johnson then left the scene, his role in perhaps the highest profile call of his career essentially complete. The fire marshal went with him. Sergeant Breunig promptly directed Deputy Horvath to join the three civilians and Deputy Hastings to assist with initial interviews. Statements were just getting underway. Deputy Hastings completed introductions and indicated he would first speak with the young woman who had been crying almost uncontrollably since law enforcement arrived. Deputy Horvath introduced himself to a large man with gold studs in his ears who identified himself simply as Kirk. Marone Becure managed to calm down considerably during the last few minutes, but wet tears still poured down the cry tracks, streaking down her cheeks. Marone's bottom lip shook slightly as she agreed to give a formal statement and was ushered off to the side of a young man carrying a gun on his hip and voice recorder in his hand. He already introduced himself as Deputy Adam Hastings with the Carver County Sheriff's Office a few minutes earlier, but did so again and expressed his condolences. What followed would be Marone's first official statement to law enforcement. Marone worked as Prince's personal assistant and told Deputy Hastings she and the two adult males arrived at Paisley Park around 9 a.m., approximately 45 minutes before the 911 call. They came to Paisley Park eager to check on Prince, who Marone said wasn't feeling well. Prince, according to Marone, never owned a cell phone, an oddity which in the coming weeks would both aid and hamper investigators as they recreated Prince's final 24 hours. Marone said repeated calls to the kitchen and bedroom landlines, Prince's primary and preferred method of communication with the outside world when home at Paisley Park, had gone unanswered. Emails sent that morning similarly received no response. Marone classified the lack of communication as somewhat unusual. Deputy Hastings scrawled some notes in his flip-top notepad and continued. According to Marone's statement, the last contact anyone had with Prince occurred at approximately 8 p.m. the previous night. Marone last saw Prince for herself at 4:30 p.m. and on April 20th when Prince dismissed her for the day. One of the paramedics approached from near the elevator area and whispered something about viewing the body. Marone again broke down crying. Her knees buckled and Deputy Hastings did his best to console and comfort her, gently pressing on his questions after a minute of mostly indecipherable words spoken through intense spurts of sobbing. Marone eventually composed herself enough to walk Deputy Hastings through how the trio arrived at Paisley Park together and were initially unable to locate Prince upon entering the building. She waited with Andrew, the 911 caller, in a nearby office while a man she referred to as Kirk began searching for Prince on Paisley Park's two expansive levels. It wasn't long into the search when Marone said Prince's unresponsive body had been discovered in the elevator, which now sat docked on the ground floor. Interestingly, Marone told Deputy Hastings she knew of no medical problems, nor did she have any relevant information regarding Prince's past, recent, or current medical history. Marone offered no insight related to substance abuse of any kind, saying multiple times she had seen nothing during the previous days to cause alarm or elevated concern. I only saw him from a distance, Marone insisted. Asked if she had anything to add, Marone replied she did not, and Deputy Hastings ended the interview. He next turned his attention toward the man from California who placed the 911 call less than 30 minutes earlier. As Deputy Hastings interviewed the young woman with teary eyes, Deputy Horvath subtly led 57-year-old Kirk Johnson a few feet away from the group and turned on his digital voice recorder, identifying himself as an employee of Prince's. Who handled most of the entourage's daily affairs. Kirk, like Marone, voluntarily agreed to speak with Deputy Horvath about the morning's shocking events. Unlike Marone, however, Kirk had plenty to say about Prince's current health issues and provided valuable insight into his recent medical history. For starters, Kirk outlined for Deputy Horvath the series of events surrounding an emergency plane landing outside of Chicago less than a week prior. Prince and a small group of inner circle friends, including Kirk, were on their way back to Minneapolis from Atlanta when Prince blacked out aboard his private jet. The incident made news around the globe. Air traffic tapes, which investigators wouldn't have for weeks, and ABC News eventually sued to obtain, painted a life-threatening picture. The small town in Moline, Illinois, received an emergency radio transmission from a private plane in the early morning hours of April 15, 2016. All ground crews knew came from a simple unresponsive passenger. Description radioed by the pilot, the craft circled Quad City Airport several times before eventually landing at 1:17 a.m. Paramedics worked to revive Prince for more than 20 minutes on the tarmac before speeding him to a nearby hospital. Kirk told Deputy Horvath no blood, urine, or any other samples were taken that night in the Illinois hospital. Prince, he said, refused due to privacy concerns, but Prince agreed to see a doctor upon returning home to Minnesota. The emergency landing in Illinois became a key focus of the investigative resources over the coming weeks. It's all making sense now, and I don't think he wanted people to know about his use of prescription medications, Kirk softly told Deputy Horvath in a moment of raw candor. Kirk's mention of prescription medication to Deputy Horvath marked the first time somebody in Prince's life suggested pharmaceuticals contributed to his death. It would not be the last. Asked about Prince's condition and demeanor over the last 24 hours, Kirk said he accompanied Prince to a doctor's appointment at a nearby North Memorial Health Clinic. The previous day, surveillance footage obtained later via search warrant confirmed Prince and Kirk entered the facility at approximately 5 p.m. Prince's primary complaints, according to Kirk, centered around the vague descriptions of anxiety, being antsy, and dehydration. Pressed to elaborate on Prince's recent symptoms, Kirk told Deputy Horvath he could tell Prince was going through withdrawal symptoms as they were driving home from the doctor and believed them to be associated with prescription pain medications. Deputy Horvath asked Kirk to specifically identify the medications, but Kirk struggled to do so with any certainty. Attention shifted to exactly how long Prince had been abusing prescription medications. A long time, Kirk said, then asking Deputy Horvath to continue the conversation in a few minutes. Kirk fielded no questions about what time he, Marone, and Andrew arrived at Paisley Park that morning, nor at what approximate time he found Prince's body. Kirk made no detailed statements on the exact position of Prince's body upon discovery. The interview ended, and Detective Horvath caught the gaze of a white man with wire-framed glasses who entered Paisley Park unnoticed at some point during his interview with Kirk. Deputy Hastings made sure his voice recorder successfully saved the interview with Marone and created a new file for a chat with Andrew Kornfeld, this morning's 911 caller and third member of the group who discovered Prince's body. Would you be willing to talk to me about what you know? Deputy Hastings asked a still shell-shocked Andrew. The answer is simple yes, with an accompanying nod. It would be the first of at least two detailed statements Andrew agreed to provide investigators during the coming hours. His cooperation and transparency bought favor with detectives. Pressing record with a firm thumb stab, Deputy Hastings first asked Andrew how he knew Prince. The candid answer further blazed a key investigative path beginning to take shape. I didn't know Prince, Andrew said. I was brought in to help with his medical issues and offer options for assistance. Deputy Hastings perked an ear. A series of questions jumped to the tip of his tongue. Brought in by whom? Medical issues? Marone just told him she'd known of none. Assistance? What kind? The young deputy pressed further. Andrew went on to say his father, Howard, operated an addiction recovery clinic in California. Howard Kornfeld received an urgent message yesterday afternoon from Prince's people requesting the veteran rehabilitation specialist meet with Prince immediately, with his father unable to make the short-notice trip, and Andrew boarded a direct flight from California to Minnesota in his place. Howard planned to join his son in Minnesota in a day or two if needed. Federal aviation records later confirmed Andrew boarded Delta Flight 0677 from San Francisco to Minneapolis without incident and exited the plane just before 6 a.m. Homeland Security confirmed for local detectives the flight represented the only time Andrew Kornfeld flew to Minnesota in at least a year. After checking into a nearby hotel, Andrew said he rendezvoused with Kirk Johnson and Marone Becure for breakfast, both of whom he met for the first time that morning and who shared it wasn't unusual to not check on Prince for a while. He's alone? Andrew asked in disbelief. The unanimated yes answers from Kirk and Marone sent a pang stinging through Andrew's gut, and he suggested they try to find Prince fast. Estimating the group entered Paisley Park somewhere close to 9:15 a.m., at least 30 seconds before his call to 911. Andrew told Deputy Hastings he set down his belongings in an office somewhere near the main door and waited there with Marone while Kirk went to look for Prince. Detectives found literature highlighting the services offered by Recovery Without Walls on a desk in the office. Andrew claimed to have waited in while the search for Prince began. Andrew said he sat quietly in the office for less than 5 minutes when Kirk returned and asked Marone to go with him. Andrew said Kirk looked out of breath, frazzled and shaken. Marone sprung from her seat and Andrew watched her and Kirk leave the office. Not long later, he couldn't say exactly how many minutes, Andrew heard a high-pitched, horrified scream racing to where his ear estimated the female shriek originated. Andrew, who had an academic background in medicine, found the elevator bank and saw Prince lying on the floor. Andrew said he checked the body for a pulse and called 911, recounting his decision not to begin CPR due to obvious signs of widespread rigor across Prince's upper body, insisting he knew nothing further about Prince's previous medical conditions. And now, being more careful with each word, Andrew explained his father's instructions simply called for outlining various options for recovery. Logistics to bring Prince back to California were in place had Prince elected to enter the facility. Deputy Hastings thanked Andrew for his time again and offered his condolences and clicked off his recorder. Noticing Deputy Horvath had completed interviews with all other adults at the scene, Deputy Hastings turned toward the elevator area, which had become the de facto Alibet temporary HQ area for the stream of detectives and law enforcement officials arriving at Paisley Park. Unsure of exactly when he arrived or why he now stood awkwardly just inside the main entryway, Deputy Horvath approached the man sporting and receding hairline and pursed lips with a note of caution. Identifying himself as Dr. Michael Schellenberg, he claimed to be currently practicing general medicine at a nearby North Memorial Medical Clinic, and far more importantly, said he personally examined Prince the day prior. Asked by Deputy Horvath if someone had requested his presence, Dr. Schellenberg replied no, adding his being at Paisley Park amounted to a complete coincidence. Deputy Horvath pressed Dr. Schellenberg for more detailed information. The doctor stammered a bit as he explained driving to Paisley Park in order to deliver test results on specimens provided by Prince the previous evening, but he avoided disclosing the exact nature of the test. "Have you been to Paisley Park before today?" Deputy Horvath asked. "Yes, Dr. Schoenberg replied, saying Kirk asked him to visit the residence on one previous occasion less than 2 weeks ago for an April 7th, 2016 house call. Prince, according to the doctor, complained of nausea and numbness in his leg and hands, and Dr. Schoenberg ordered a pale and frail Prince transported to his clinic for further observation." Details of the April 7th interaction between Prince, Dr. Schoenberg, and Kirk came under intense investigative scrutiny during the ensuing weeks, going on to say Kirk once again asked him to see Prince yesterday, April 20th. Dr. Schoenberg said Prince came in directly to his nearby clinic and used a private back entrance. The visit lasted approximately 90 minutes and concluded just before 6:30 p.m. based on his examination. Dr. Schoenberg told Deputy Horvath his purpose for his morning's trip to Paisley Park centered around discussing substance abuse treatment with Prince. It would be all Dr. Schoenberg volunteered during his conversation with Deputy Horvath, who nodded agreeably and ended their interview. The cops would have more questions for Dr. Schoenberg in the coming hours. Many more. Detective DeWitt Meyer answered his phone inside the Carver County Sheriff's Office with no way of knowing what waited for him on the other end. He never did, really, but years of responding to emergencies coupled with the serious tone of Sergeant Buenig's voice made it clear this particular call required his full and immediate attention. After briskly bringing him up to date on the morning's rapidly evolving events, Sergeant Buenig requested immediate investigative assistance at Paisley Park. "We're on our way," Detective Myers said, simultaneously squelching the call while hoisting a sidearm and grabbing his field gear. Quickly locating both Sheriff Jim Olson and Chief Deputy John Camerad, Carver County's two top cops, Detective Meyer informally briefed both on what units at the scene had so far conveyed. In short, paramedics officially declared Prince deceased. The world media would soon be sent into a frenzy, and the body's current location remained at the site of death, apparently still warm inside Paisley Park. Sheriff Olson ordered a thorough and complete investigation, issuing on-the-spot authorization for any resources needed to carry out such a mission. The sheriff made clear all available investigators would be immediately assigned to the case. The sheriff's one mandate: no mistakes. 3 detectives, all of whom had been making lunch plans just minutes earlier, now gathered around Detective Meyer for a short huddle inside the Carver County Sheriff's Office headquarters. Crime lab techs, likely an entire team of them, would be needed, and the sheriffs decided to call neighboring Hennepin County for assistance on that front. Encompassing the entirety of Minneapolis and its southwest suburbs, the experience of Hennepin County's crime lab represented the best Minnesota had to offer and routinely answered calls involving the state's high-profile cases. Detective Meyer next placed a direct call to Dr. Quinn Strobel, the local medical examiner, who, as of this phone conversation, became the custodial caretaker of Prince's body. Detective Meyer told Dr. Quinn her personal presence and oversight would be needed at Paisley Park. Time, he said, was of the essence, and Dr. Quinn, who in less than 24 hours would perform the autopsy on Prince herself, told Detective Meyer to expect her expeditious arrival. An assistant, Kat, would join her. Prince's mansion sat 7 miles from detectives' current location. They left almost simultaneously, somewhere close to 10 a.m., and would be there in less than 10 minutes. Back at Paisley Park, Sergeant Breunig stood security near the body as Deputy Hastings and Horvath conducted their interviews near the main entrance. He fielded a radio call from dispatch, informing him the medical examiner's office just marked themselves en route to the scene. A few minutes later, Sergeant Breunig's cell phone buzzed to signal an incoming call, and the voice of a female medical investigator from the ME's office passed along word. Dr. Quinn elected to proactively consult a pathologist. Sergeant Breunig made note of the update and assured the information would reach his chain of command. The ME team estimated their arrival to be way less than an hour. Instructions to not, for any reason, move the body received a responsive understanding from Sergeant Breunig, who agreed to keep security surrounding the elevator landing constant until the state's top doc arrived. Initial reports seemed to indicate Prince spent the night alone inside the mansion. Noticing cameras sprinkled throughout the building, Sergeant Breunig quickly learned none functioned. Keypads salted throughout Paisley Park's interior were similarly deactivated from their control elements years ago, and visitors to Prince's home left no electronic footprint of any kind. Prince harbored concerns about being watched and chose instead to rely on gates, locks, and his pet doves for security. He knows if somebody comes into the building, a witness close to Prince soon told detectives. The doves always cried and would coo like crazy. It would take some straight Mission Impossible stuff for somebody to even get close to him. Deputy Horvath returned to the elevator area after finishing his interview with a large African-American male and an unidentified middle-aged white male who at some point during the last 10 minutes gained entrance to the building. Sergeant Breunig immediately posted Deputy Horvath at the compound's gated entrance with instructions to start a crime scene log. Until further notice, nobody entered or left Paisley Park without first being cleared and chronicled by Deputy Horvath. He remained at the main gate carrying out his duty for the next 9 hours. Lieutenant Kittleson parked his squad car near the main entrance and in one smooth motion exited the vehicle, snapped on a pair of latex gloves, and closed the driver's side doors. Less than 30 minutes had passed since the 911 call where Lieutenant Kittleson entered Paisley Park's expansive lobby and saw Sergeant Breunig standing near the elevator landing about 40 feet from the entryway. Beside him lay a body. I saw what appeared to me to be Prince's body laying on the floor in front of the elevator on top of a rug, Lieutenant Kittleson reported, later noting an identical rug also stretched across the second floor elevator entrance. The body was fully clothed and lying slightly leaning to the left with the feet toward the elevator. Explaining how paramedics officially made the DOA call just minutes earlier, Sergeant Breunig ticked through for Lieutenant Kittleson the members of law enforcement currently on the scene, those en route to Paisley Park, and identities of 3 civilians who met first responders at the front door. Sheriff Olson's arrival about 5 minutes later caught both men's attention, and greetings were exchanged as their boss and elected public officials strode crisply toward their location near Prince's body. The sheriff entered with Detective Christopher Nelson and Christina Wagner. Both played key roles in ensuing investigation, and leadership soon tabbed Detective Wagner as the case's lead detective. Prince's face appeared moist. Detective Wagner remembered the temperature inside Paisley Park felt warm. I later observed the thermostat was set at 75 degrees and there were space heaters turned on and positioned in various rooms. Lieutenant Kittleson and Sergeant Breunig brought Sheriff Olson and the two detectives up to speed. Detective Meyer, who ran point at Paisley Park most of the day, arrived next and brought with him detectives Angela Nucci and Patrick Murphy. They too received a short briefing from Sergeant Breunig on morning's events. The swelling huddle of law enforcement near Prince's body soon fractured as the pace of activity both in and around Paisley Park began to rapidly accelerate. Detective Meyer started issuing directives. First on a list of tasks to be performed, a detailed sweep of the entire property to ensure no additional individuals were present inside the building or anywhere along the mansion's exterior perimeter. Was there a guide? Lieutenant Kittleson suggested enlisting the help of a man he knew from previous interactions as Kirk, the same man who discovered the body and whom the Deputy Horvath had finished interviewing a few minutes earlier. Kirk and Lieutenant Kittleson worked together on several previous occasions when local law enforcement helped with marking other logistical nuisances associated with concerts at Paisley Park. Prince regularly hosted public and semi-public events on the grounds requiring notification and permitting from police, fire, and local governments. Lieutenant Kittleson often liaisoned on behalf of Carver County. Kirk, was someone I knew to be the event coordinator and responsible for the building and grounds of Paisley Park. Lieutenant Kittleson later wrote, plans called for Kirk to accompany Detective Wagner and Sergeant Breunig on careful sweep of the main building's interior. Detective Meyer announced his intention to join as well, and Lieutenant Kittleson volunteered to maintain security around the body. One of the adult males, the one who called 911, requested to retrieve some personal property in another area of the building, and Detective Meyer approved a proposal by Detective Murphy to escort the party to its location. The young female's purse would be collected as well. Detective Murphy reviewed the items a few minutes later. Detective Meyer asked the trio of Marone Becure, Andrew Kornfeld, and Dr. Michael Schuenberg to give further statements off-site. All agreed and were escorted by Detectives Murphy, Nucci, and Nelson to nearby Chanhassen City Hall for additional questioning. Two additional adults, an unidentified married couple who now stood crying in the lobby, having arrived a few minutes prior, as well as Deputy Hastings and the community service officer, received similar instructions from Detective Meyer, all left together. Marone, clearly too distraught to drive, accepted a ride from one of the detectives. The four-member sweep team, with Kirk running point, simultaneously began their protective sweep, while Lieutenant Kittleson stood solo watch near the elevator landing. Investigators promptly learned about the many hats Kirk Johnson wore while working for Prince. As the quartet left to begin searching the primary structure's interior, Kirk called himself the Chief of Security and close associate. His official title mattered little at the present moment. Kirk had the keys, while most of them, not to mention an intimate knowledge of the mansion's twisting architectural layout. Detective Meyer asked Kirk who lived in Paisley Park, and Kirk flatly replied, just Prince. Everyone on Prince's staff, to include himself, Marone, the chef, driver, etc., slept elsewhere. Most guests and visitors from out of town elsewhere, slept elsewhere. They stayed at an upscale hotel less than a mile down the road from Paisley Park. Detective Wagner eventually learned Kirk lived in a nearby home which Prince at one point purchased for Kirk as a gift. Kirk sold the property in early 2017. Kirk continued chatting freely as he guided Sergeant Breunig and Detectives Wagner and Meyer from room to room. The three sheriffs each wore latex gloves and searched everywhere they believed a human could hide. Behind shower curtains, under beds, beneath blankets, inside closets, tucked in large trunks, the cops found nobody hiding or sleeping, and Detective Meyer later deliberately noted the group intentionally refrained from searching areas which the sweep team did not think could conceal a person. None of the detectives took photos. During this initial security search, however, Sergeant Breunig reported seeing a pair of black leather gloves and matching fringed vest lying in a heap on the floor of an upstairs hallway. Each glove featured an embroidered gold symbol commonly associated with prints, and Kirk classified their placement as unusual. The garments rested within sight of the second story's elevator doors, and Kirk volunteered prints were the same piece of clothing the prior evening. Kirk said Prince often chose to stay in the same clothes throughout the overnight hours, and Kirk described for detectives his body typical tendency to sleep from just before dawn until early afternoon. It was, however, a bit odd for Prince, who leaned far more toward being a neat freak than slob, to leave clothing strewn haphazardly on the hallway floor. Detectives for now left the gloves and vest untouched and unphotographed, but mentally tagged the clothing for later examination. A room in the basement, which Kirk referred to as the vault room, appeared locked and unable to be searched. Kirk said it could not be opened, adding, "Only Prince knew how to enter the room. Police tried multiple sets of keys during the course of the next few days. None unlocked the hatch protecting the vault room. The door is directly in front of the basement elevator. When standing inside the elevator, Detective Meyer reported the door is purple in color and has the Prince symbol on it. It took law enforcement more than 3 weeks to breach the door and the hidden bank vault located behind it. Clearing the interior of Paisley Park and deeming it secure, Detective Meyer asked Detective Wagner to obtain a second, more detailed statement from Kirk and to record the conversation. The two drifted across the lobby looking for a place to talk. Returning to the elevator area and Lieutenant Kittleson's position, Detective Meyer left his cell phone camera holstered, an unusual break from his normal investigative routine. "I usually take snapshots with my cellular telephone at death scenes to preserve images," Detective Meyer later wrote. "I did not do this due to the sensitivity of the investigation. Nobody else took photos that I am aware of, except the Hennepin County Crime Lab. I asked the investigative staff when doing an after-action brief if anyone had any photos on their cell phones, and no one did. A phone call strengthening an investigative direction already beginning to materialize interrupted the chat between Detective Meyer and Lieutenant Kittleson. The call from Detective Murphy to Detective Meyer was the first of 3 such phone conversations between the two men that morning. This one pertained to information Detective Murphy just received while interviewing Andrew Cornfield, the 911 caller at Chanhassen City Hall. "I'm listening," Detective Meyer said, the anticipatory tone in his vocal inflection impossible to miss. Exactly how word of a death at Paisley Park first reached the media may never be fully understood, but news spreads fast in Minnesota whenever it involves Prince and Paisley Park. Real fast. Media trucks from every local news outlet appeared almost immediately outside the fence, bringing Prince's home in a large convoy of satellite trucks and SUVs with network logos quickly took over the narrow two-lane access road. Someone needed to make a statement, and Lieutenant Kittleson phoned Chief Deputy Camerad back at the headquarters to discuss options. The two decided Lieutenant Kittleson would make the first official remarks on behalf of the state's law enforcement collective. Leaving his post next to Prince's body for the first time in more than an hour, Lieutenant Kittleson approached a cluster of media personnel and cameramen gathered just outside of Paisley Park's main gate. He passed out business cards to each outstretched hand containing his various contact information, email, phone, and office location. Lights flicked on as journalists anticipated the start of a press conference. In a few mics lowered into place, pens clicked, hands raised, and reporters scrummed for prime real estate. Remarks by design would be brief and vague. After first reviewing acceptable parking and staging protocols, many extended advanced appreciation for adhering to, Lieutenant Kittleson began speaking. The Carver County Sheriff's Office is conducting an investigation, and the crime lab and medical examiner are on their way, he said. You may contact our office in Chaska for additional information. That was it. Groans and shouted questions arose in union from the pack of journalists as Lieutenant Kittleson thanked the group for their time and headed back toward the mansion. An unidentified reporter asked if there had been a death on the property as Lieutenant Kittleson walked away from the makeshift podium. Yes, he mouthed. Gone less than 5 minutes, Lieutenant Kittleson reassumed his security post near Prince's body. His simple yes response, however, sent newsrooms across the globe into overdrive. It wouldn't take long before the first leaks hit wire services. Music journalists credit a man named Zach Myers with being the first to publicly identify Prince as the deceased party inside Paisley Park. His tweet became the primary source cited by celebrity gossip site TMZ, who ran with the story just minutes later. Hearing terrible news from a very inside source that Prince has passed, Zach tweeted 11:37 a.m. Central Standard Time. The name Zach Myers does not appear in any public documents associated with the investigation into Prince's death, and his ties to Prince's camp remain unconfirmed. A musician based in Memphis, who in 2018 released his 6th studio album, Zach tweeted again about an hour later. I got a text early this morning from a friend of the Prince camp and refused to believe the tweet read, I'll probably be feeling the same way tomorrow. Andrew Cornfield wanted his backpack bad enough to approach Detective Murphy and ask for permission to retrieve it from a nearby office. The request and apparent importance behind it came across a bit odd given the moment's gravity. Marone Becure's purse sat in the same location, and she made several similar requests to have it on her person. Detective Murphy told Andrew to hold tight while he consulted with Lieutenant Kittleson and Detective Meyer, who were directing traffic from the elevator area. The group agreed it would be okay for Andrew to collect the property as long as he went with the police escort.